Wealth, fame, power.
What's going on? It's your host Tokyo Tron, and welcome to episode number 4 of Power Scaling all of One Piece. In this video, I'll be going over all of the Baratie arc, and this is the longest arc so far. Being the longest arc, it also happens to have the most characters that seriously need scaling, so this video might be a tad bit longer than normal. But I know you're gonna love it anyway, so you might as well drop a like right now before I get started. So first off, we have Johnny, the infamous pirate hunter and former member of Zoro's bounty hunting team. His first appearance in the story actually makes him quite easy to scale because of the circumstances. So Johnny's partner Yosaku is sick, and they were stranded on a rock in the middle of the sea. And at the same time that they happened to be stranded at the rock, Usopp was doing some target practice and he used the rock as his target. So he shot his cannon at the rock and blew it up, further injuring Yosaku, who was already in a bad state because of his illness. So now we have a bloodlusted Johnny who's sieging the Mary for revenge for his partner Yosaku, and he's really trying his hardest to kill Luffy. And with all this motivation that he has, he's still unfortunately unable to hit Luffy once, and then he gets negatived by Luffy. So he's absolutely not mid-tier with Luffy, and normally I would put Johnny in low tier, not fodder, but in the very next chapter after losing to Luffy, Johnny and Yosaku get 1v2'd with one attack from Iron Fist full body. So both Johnny and Yosaku are going to have to be at the very top of fodder tier for now. Next up, we have Lieutenant Iron Fist full body, and as I just mentioned when scaling Yosaku and Johnny, Full Body was able to one-shot and negative both of them, which I scaled to being fodder tier. So we know from this that Iron Fist Full Body definitely not in fodder tier, he scales above it since he can negative anyone in that tier. The only real strength feat out of Full Body besides doing this is he's casually able to break through a table, but again this is One Piece and that's really nothing in the One Piece verse when we scale everything in that sense. And for Full Body, right after he broke through the table, he starts charging at Sanji, and Sanji knocked him out instantly, and it wasn't even remotely close. In fact, Sanji dealt with Full Body's little outburst so quick that it was pretty much off screen, off panel, or whatever you want to call it. We just see Full Body charging at Sanji, and in the very next panel, Sanji's just holding Full Body by his face. Honestly, Full Body's just trash. I'm gonna have to put him in low tier in between Alvida and Axehand Morgan, and this is really only because he was able to negative the two fodder tiers, so we can't go down there. And next up we have Chef Patty. Again, he's also a pretty weird character to scale because he has some aspects of a gag character within the story, but realistically he's also pretty straightforward. So he doesn't seem to have any impressive fighting styles, techniques, or even any mastery over a specific weapon. He's just a seemingly strong person amongst regular dudes, not a strong person amongst monsters like the Straw Hats or other prominent figures. Throughout the arc, he's constantly getting thrown around by Sanji, and then he even gets negatived by Krieg, so I'm gonna have to put Patty in low tier right above Lieutenant Full Body. And now the world's strongest swordsman, Mihawk. So first, I'm gonna quickly run through his feats on the arc, and then I'll discuss his overall strength based on portrayal. So the very first thing we find out about Mihawk is that he was able to destroy all 50 battleships of the Krieg pirates. And this is a super impressive feat, not just as pure destruction, but also as a raw power and speed feat. So just to clarify what I mean by this, destroying ships with an attack in itself isn't really super impressive. We even see that someone like Ace using a casual attack can destroy a whole line of ships, and this is the same Ace that is stalemated with Smoker. So realistically, destroying ships by itself isn't what makes Mihawk super impressive. The thing that makes him impressive is Mihawk seemingly destroyed these ships without using air cuts or any other techniques. He just cut straight through 50 ships with his sword directly, meaning that his sword itself sliced through all of the ships like butter, and then he was able to blitz back and forth between all of the 50 ships, dicing them up without anyone seeing him. So not only was he fast enough to almost instantaneously destroy 50 ships, it was also so fast that no one else could even see him do it, and he was strong enough to physically cut them without using any sort of special techniques. And all of this is just based on some lore that we get right before we actually see Mihawk in the story for the first time. and upon his arrival he does pretty much the same thing, but this time just to one Krieg ship. So when Mihawk pulls up on his boat, he cuts and dices up the Krieg's final ship into pieces without anyone even seeing him do it. And right after this, we get the fight between Mihawk and Zoro. But unfortunately, it was such a complete negative that I can't even use this to scale Mihawk. Zoro was just so irrelevant in terms of Mihawk that I can't even use this to wank Mihawk whatsoever. The one thing that we know is that from the tier list we have Zoro in mid tier, and Mihawk is leagues above Zoro, so Mihawk should also be leagues above mid tier. So now the real debate comes between Shanks and Mihawk. And personally, I used to think that Shanks was above Mihawk just based on portrayal and kind of being one of Luffy's idol, but recently I've come to the realization that yeah, that really is just my own headcanon. And in the series, even though portrayal does matter, headcanon is not something that I'm going to use to power scale, so I'm going to talk about what we actually know. So we know for a fact that around 10 years ago, Shanks was on Fuchsia Village with Luffy, and sometime before that, Mihawk fought Shanks, and Mihawk won, making him the world's strongest swordsman. We can also assume that the fight was a high to extreme diff, and it was most likely an extreme diff fight. You might be wondering, how do I know that Mihawk won, or how do I know that it was an extreme diff fight? So we know that Mihawk won primarily because of his title as the world's strongest swordsman. If he did lose to Shanks, he wouldn't be given that title. And then the question, how do I know the fight was close? It's because Mihawk was interested in a rematch with Shanks. The only time that Mihawk became uninterested in a match with Shanks was as soon as Shanks lost one arm, meaning that Shanks with two arms should be somewhat relative to Mihawk, and as soon as he lost one arm, at least in Mihawk's eyes, he was no longer worth his time and wasn't even a match for him to fight. So sorry to all the Shanks fans, this isn't saying that Shanks is weak or anything, but Shanks with one arm at the bare minimum is relativistic to Mihawk, but he's not quite on Mihawk's level. Mihawk's just has to be at least slightly above Shanks with one arm. So using all that information, and also seeing as where I scale Shanks, I'm gonna have to put Mihawk in Yonko level right above Shanks, at least for now. And now on to Don Krieg's 2nd Division Commander, Iron Wall Pearl. And really his biggest feat is not getting one-shot by Sanji. It was a no-named attack by Sanji, but he's not a fodder tier or low tier character since everyone in those tiers got one-shot by no-name Sanji kicks. But other than not being one-shot by a no-named attack, Iron Wall Pearl really can't compete with Sanji. So to quickly add some context for the fight to show why I scale him in the way I do, Sanji's master Zeph is being held hostage, so Sanji's put in a situation where he's very distracted, and on top of that, if he attacks or defends himself, Zeph would get shot. So because of this, Sanji's just kind of left out in the open, and Iron Wall Pearl gets numerous blindside attacks off on Sanji without Sanji defending himself in the slightest. And even after decimating Sanji in this way and just beating him repeatedly, he's not able to defeat or even knock out Sanji. So essentially you have a Sanji who's just a punching bag because of the situation that his master's in, and even Sanji just being a punching bag, leaving himself completely open, Iron Wall Pearl can't get the job. And after still not being able to defeat Sanji, Gin one-shots him, albeit Iron Wall Pearl was off guard since he had no idea that Gin was going to attack him. So I'm going to have to put Iron Wall Pearl in mid-tier, right behind Buggy D Clown. And I just mentioned him, so now I guess we'll just go ahead and talk about Gin. And unfortunately, he's also a pretty weird character to scale. So he seems somewhat relativistic to Sanji in their fight, but it's also clear that neither of them are really going all out whatsoever in their fight. And it's not even that they're just not trying their hardest, Sanji really isn't even fighting back for most of the fight. And then the fight ends with Gin giving up since he can't force himself to kill Sanji, so we can't really tell precisely where Gin is in terms of strength. The only thing that I can say is, at least based on portrayal in the arc, he's somewhat relativistic to Sanji, as I previously mentioned. So in comparison to everyone else, I'm gonna have to put Gin in mid-tier, in between Kuro and Django. And after covering Gin, no better place to go than to the captain of the Krieg pirates, Don Krieg himself. And he is by far the most formidable villain that we've seen in the story up till now, obviously not counting Mihawk. So he's a really tough opponent for Luffy for a couple reasons. The first is it's a really bad matchup. So Krieg's full body and armor is equipped with spikes, and we know that anything sharp is pretty hard for Luffy to overcome. So whenever Luffy punches Krieg, he also punches spikes, which somewhat damage Luffy since it's a hard counter. And besides just being a hard counter, maybe it's due to his armor, but he's also able to get some pretty good hits off on Luffy. But again, every time that he does get to hit Luffy, Luffy quickly counters and hits him back, and the damage that Luffy's taking is mainly from the spikes and also previous injuries just a little bit earlier in the fight. And then he's even able to take a Gum Gum pistol due to his armor and Luffy's cuts. And even though Luffy is nerfed and he couldn't use the full damage of the Gum Gum pistol when he attacked him just because he had cuts all over his arm, it's still the first time that any villain in the series has pretty much negged an attack of this caliber from Luffy. And then on top of that, Luffy charges up a bit later towards the climax of the fight. He charges up a Gum Gum bazooka, and even though he's still heavily damaged from it, Krieg is able to get up even though it did do a lot of damage to him. So then he ends up catching Luffy in a net, but Luffy gets off one more just twisting attack and is able to beat him. So as I was saying before, this is the most formidable villain and the most competitive fight that we've seen Luffy in so far in the series, and it was a high diff fight. Not extreme diff, but definitely high diff. So he has to go in mid-tier right behind Zoro and Luffy. And now I guess I should quickly go over Sanji and Zeph. For Sanji, not really too much to say about him because he didn't have a high diff fight, but based on the way he treated low tiers and fodder tiers so far, he's gonna go in mid tier right behind Zoro and Luffy. And as for Zeph, there's really not too much to say about him in his current state, even though it's implied that he was a lot stronger in his prime. For his current state right now, I'm gonna have to put him in mid tier behind Kuro, just because we didn't really see too much from him. And the one thing that I will say about Zeph is that if he could have easily defeated or at least competed with Gin or Krieg, he would have done it. There's really no reason for him to be held hostage besides the fact that he really couldn't hang with them. And for that reason, that's why I have to put him in mid-tier behind Gin. After scaling Zeph, that wraps up power scaling the Baratie arc. And as always, that's just my thoughts. Now let me hear yours in the comments down below. And to stay up to date with all my future content, make sure to like and subscribe.